Of the three most recent iPads to come out, if you said to me, Sagi, pick just one, like not necessarily the best one or the biggest, but the one that ticks most of the boxes for what you want and need, I would choose the iPad Air 4. And I can hear some murmurs in the background, but the iPad Pro is bigger, it's faster, has a better refresh rate, more storage options, better speakers, and a better camera system, which is true, and I'll get to that. And at the same time, some of you may be thinking, well, the iPad 8 does everything that I need, and it's cheaper than the iPad 4, to which I say, that's great. You should buy the iPad 8 and save some money. But let's talk about why I would choose the iPad Air 4, and then I'll give you some reasons why you may want to choose a different model depending on your needs. The first reason I would choose the iPad Air 4 is the design. I love the squared off design that was previously reserved for the iPad Pro. It matches the iPhone 12 lineup. The smaller bezels give it a cleaner look, and we don't have that home button taking up real estate on the front. So I almost feel like I'm getting an 11-inch iPad Pro without having to pay that Pro price, and I'm getting the newer chip, which I'll get to in a minute. And if I can pay less and get more, I'm all for that. One exception as far as user experience is concerned is biometric authentication, where the iPad Air 4 uses a new Touch ID, which is integrated into the top button, instead of the Face ID that we get with the iPad Pro. And there's a little bit of a give and take here. Normally, I would prefer Face ID because it's pretty much automatic. I just grab the iPad Pro, I swipe up, and I'm in. And for the most part, I use all my iPads at home where I'm now wearing a mask. But I'm going to take into account the fact that a lot of people are using their iPads in public, and that's where the new Touch ID implementation works great. It doesn't require you to remove your mask, and it doesn't take up any space on the front like the older home button. So in a vacuum, I would prefer Face ID, but with the current situation, the upgraded Touch ID could be more useful. Another similarity between the iPad Air 4 and the iPad Pro is that they both use a USB-C port for charging and accessories. This is definitely an upgrade over the Lightning port, which was first introduced, I think in like 2012, and I think it's time to retire it, even though it was used on the iPad 8 and the entire lineup of iPhone 12. Now, in addition to faster charging, we're also getting compatibility with a wide variety of hubs, accessories, and external SSDs. Now, this is a specific area where the iPad 8 struggled a bit, both in terms of options and convenience. If you watched my 10 days with the iPad 8 video, then you saw that I couldn't get every external SSD to work when I was using a dongle. And on top of that, I had to use a lightning cable to provide power in order for it to work. On the iPad Air 4, every external SSD that I tried to use worked, and all I needed was a USB cable. There was no need for power. Again, this is functionality that I do have on my iPad Pro, but I'm getting it here at a lower cost. The next reason for choosing the iPad Air 4 is the display. Like with the iPad Pro, I'm getting a liquid retina, fully laminated display, meaning that the display layer, the touch layer, and the cover glass are laminated into one single piece. This also means that the image on the iPad Air 4 looks like it's right at the top of the glass versus the non-laminated iPad 8, where the image looks like it's under a piece of glass. Personally, I like the look of the laminated display better and the improved functionality when using the Apple Pencil. The iPad 8 display isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, and it worked great for me for viewing content, surfing the web, taking notes, then doing office type work for managing the channel. But the iPad Air 4 has an anti-reflective coating, it's a true tone display, and it's a DCI-P3 display, which is a wider color gamut that's more accurate. For casual use, this isn't really a concern, but when I do some photo and video editing on my iPad Air 4, it's definitely a feature that I like to have. Now, ultimately, the iPad Pro does have the best display with a faster refresh rate of 120 Hz, and while I do like it, I don't know that that would be a single reason that would sway me to pay extra just to have that feature on an iPad. If you're still watching and have gotten value from this video, give it a thumbs up. It very much helps the video and the channel, and it lets me know what kind of content you like so that I can make more of it. And I see that over 90% of you aren't subscribed yet, so hit that subscribe button. Next, I want to talk about the speakers and the camera system, where I feel the iPad Air 4 gives me everything I need for what I do. Starting with the speakers, we have 4 of them, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, which makes a big difference when you compare it with the iPad 8. If you saw my iPad 8 6-month review, that was one of my only complaints, and that's because the 2 speakers on the iPad 8 are on the bottom. So when you're watching content or playing games in landscape mode, the audio only comes out to one side. With the iPad Air 4, I get speakers on the top and the bottom. So when I'm in landscape mode, I still get a much better stereo sort of surround sound experience. And it's noticeable. If I handed you both these iPads and let you listen to them, you would easily hear the difference. Now, ultimately, the iPad Pro has the best speakers because it has 4 speakers that are each controlled independently, and they also respond to the orientation that you're holding the iPad, but the iPad Air 4 speakers are plenty good for what I use them for. Now, the camera system is another area where the Air 4 gives me just what I need. For the most part, if I use the camera on an iPad at all, I'm using the front-facing camera to do video calls. And here we're getting a 7 megapixel FaceTime camera versus the underwhelming 1.2 megapixel camera on the iPad 8. The iPad Pro has a 7 megapixel true depth camera, which makes face detection for Face ID possible, but the other features like portrait mode, portrait lighting, Animoji, and Memoji aren't really features that I use on my iPad. Now going to the rear-facing camera, we're getting a 12 megapixel camera, which again, I don't really use because I use the camera on my iPhone. But I'm taking into account the fact that I might want to use this iPad to create some content, at which point I would be very happy with the image quality and the features on this rear-facing camera. Now the iPad Pro has 2 cameras in the back plus a LiDAR scanner, but it's just not enough of an advantage for what I do with my iPad. And speaking of that, let's talk about processing power. Now, the A14 chip on the iPad Air 4 is crazy fast and powerful. Like everything I do from just waking it up from sleep to opening apps, switching between apps, surfing the web, photo and video editing, everything is super fast. And when it comes to playing games, the iPad Air 4 is extremely responsive. There's no lag and the gameplay is very smooth. Now, I don't get hung up on test scores very much, but if you care, I do have them in my iPad Air 4 versus iPad Pro comparison. Basically, the Air 4 just crushes every task that I throw at it, and if I need more power than that, then I'm probably not using an iPad at all. I'm probably using an M1 MacBook Air or M1 MacBook Pro. And this might just be my preference, but even with the Magic Keyboard, which I have for the iPad Air and the 12.9-inch Pro, I'd still rather use the keyboard and trackpad on the MacBooks. They just provide a better typing experience. The device is better balanced from when I'm not at my desk. And while the trackpad on the Magic Keyboard is the best trackpad that I've ever used on a detachable keyboard trackpad combo, the one on the MacBook is the best trackpad that I've ever used, period. And when it comes to doing work on an iPad, one consideration that you may want to keep in mind is storage. And I guess it's a consideration that you need to have regardless, depending on how many apps and games you want. The iPad Air 4 comes in a 64 and 256 gig versions. And I feel like for most people, if you're not storing image and video files on your iPad, 64 gigs will work just fine. The 32 gigs on the iPad 8 is a little bit low once you start installing some larger games, especially if you're downloading all the maps and features. So just to give you an example, when I first installed PUBG, it took up about 4.5 gigs, but now after downloading some extra maps and all the upgraded features, it's up to 8.2. So again, if this is a device that you want to keep for a long time and you're just using it for games and apps, so no photo or video files, you could probably get by with 64 gigs, but I would probably tell you to look at the 256 gig version so that 3 years down the road, you're not having to switch only because you ran out of space. If you plan on doing photo and video editing, then 256 gigs is definitely the way to go. Remember that if you're working with image or video files that are on an external drive, you can preview them there, but if you want to edit them, you have to copy them onto the iPad Air 4. Next, I'm going to talk about accessories, and then I'm going to go into why another model might be better for you. So to start off with, I already talked about the USB-C port, which opens the door to a lot of different accessories, and I briefly mentioned the Magic Keyboard. It's a really good option. It has a nice keyboard with good feedback, a nice amount of travel, and an outstanding trackpad. And it also offers USB-C pass-through through this USB-C port here on the bottom left. Now, as far as Apple Pencil functionality, the iPad Air 4 is compatible with the 2nd generation Pencil. It pairs and charges wirelessly. It's more comfortable to hold and use. It won't roll off the table because of this flat edge, and it offers the double tap functionality for quickly switching between tools. Now, the 1st gen Pencil works very well with the iPad 8, but if you're looking for the best Apple has to offer in terms of pencil functionality, the 2nd gen pencil is definitely where it's at. I have a dedicated video to iPad Air 4 accessories, so check it out if you're curious about my favorites, and in particular that orange item I talk about. I think that so far I've made a pretty good case for why I would choose the iPad Air 4, but there are some reasons why I would go in another direction. Sure, if I wanted a larger display, 120Hz refresh rate, Face ID, better speakers, more storage options, and more RAM for things like additional layers in Procreate, then I would get the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. It also has a better camera system, so while it's not a selling point for me, I just want to make sure that I include it. If I didn't need a fully laminated display, didn't mind the larger bezels and the original home buttons, having speakers that face only one direction, and then the reduced compatibility with the most advanced accessories, or if I was just on a tighter budget, I'd have no problems getting the iPad 8. Click on one of these videos to watch some other related content. I hope you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you haven't yet. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.